News of the altercation between Crisostomo Ibarra and Padre Damaso spread like wildfire across San Diego. What began as whispers among a few soon became the talk of every street corner, market stall, and town square. The incident was shocking not just because it involved Ibarra, a well-respected man in the community, but because it involved the town's most powerful friar, Padre Damaso, who had always wielded immense influence over the townspeople. At first, many found it hard to believe that such a thing had happened. "Impossible," exclaimed one old man, shaking his head. "No one would dare lay a hand on a friar, let alone Ibarra. He's far too sensible for that." Yet as more witnesses came forward, the facts became undeniable. It was during a luncheon at the home of Capitan Tiago that the two men had exchanged heated words. The argument quickly escalated into an altercation when Padre Damaso insulted the memory of Ibarra's father, Don Rafael. Unable to contain his anger, Ibarra struck the friar. "Padre Damaso is dead!" exclaimed one young man breathlessly as he ran into a crowded marketplace. His voice rang out, catching the attention of everyone within earshot. "What? How do you know? What happened?" Several voices called out from the crowd, their expressions a mix of disbelief and curiosity. The young man, who had been there when the confrontation took place, elaborated. "When they picked him up, his face was covered in blood and he wasn't breathing. I think Ibarra has killed him." He glanced nervously over his shoulder, as though expecting the Guardia Civil to appear at any moment. "May he rest in peace, then," muttered a bystander, shaking his head. "But perhaps it was time he settled his debts. That friar has been causing trouble for too long." "Trouble? You should have seen what he did earlier this morning in the convento," interjected a thin, scholarly-looking student who had been passing by. "It was outrageous." "What did he do? Tell us," asked a group of men eagerly, leaning closer. The student smirked. "You remember that Spanish mestizo who left through the sacristy during the sermon?" "Yes, we saw him," a bystander replied. "Padre Damaso took note of him. We wondered what would happen." Well, after the sermon, Padre Damaso summoned the man and demanded to know why he had left. The student continued, his voice growing more animated. "I don't understand Tagalog, Padre," the mestizo said. "Can you believe it? He pretended not to know our language. Then he had the nerve to joke that it was all Greek to him." The student mimicked the mestizo's tone, eliciting chuckles from the crowd. Padre Damaso slapped him across the face. The two of them came to blows before anyone could separate them. "If that had happened to me," one of the younger men hissed, his hands clenched into fists, "I wouldn't have just stood there." Several others murmured in agreement, nodding as they thought of their own run-ins with the overbearing friar. "Religion should never be imposed by force or violence," said another student with a more measured tone. "It's one thing to preach, but this, it's almost as if we've gone back to the times of Nero." "You're wrong there," retorted one of the men in the group with a sly smile. "Nero was a great artist. Padre Damaso, on the other hand, is just a pompous preacher." As the younger men debated, some of the town's older and more conservative citizens gathered in a nearby hut, waiting for the arrival of the Captain General. Among them was the town's Gobernador Cilio, who scratched his head thoughtfully. Who was right, and who was wrong here? It's hard to say. Señor Ibarra might have handled the situation better if he had shown a little more restraint. Don Filippo, sitting nearby, overheard and couldn't help but interject. More prudence! If Padre Damaso had even half the prudence Ibarra showed, we wouldn't be in this situation. The real tragedy is that their roles were reversed. Ibarra conducted himself like a wise old man, while the friar acted like a petulant child. "But no one intervened?" asked Capitan Martin, his brow furrowed with concern. "Not even the alcalde or the other friars? Only Capitan Tiago's daughter Maria Clara dared to approach and separate them? Ah, worse and worse. I wouldn't want to be in that young man's shoes now. None of the friars will forgive him for making them look weak." Capitan Basilio, another respected elder in the town, chimed in. "I wonder what will happen to him now. Will the people stand by him, or will fear silence them?" Don Filippo exchanged a glance with Basilio, his expression hardening. We can't let the people abandon him. We must remember all that his family has done for us. But I fear you may be right. If the people are too afraid, we, his friends, must not desert him. The gobernador Silio sighed. But what can we do? The friars always have the upper hand. They always have the upper hand because we let them. Don Filippo's voice rose with frustration. We allow them to dominate us with fear. As long as we remain divided and think only of ourselves, they will always win. While the men debated the politics of the situation, the women of the town had their own opinions. Capitana Tinai, a kind-hearted woman, sighed heavily. Poor Crisostomo. What would his mother say if she were still alive? If something like this happened to my son, I don't think I could bear it. Capitana Maria, however, took a different stance. I'm proud of him for defending his father's memory. If it were my sons, I'd want them to do the same. What kind of man hangs his head in silence when his family is insulted? Sister Rufa, ever devout, frowned. But you can't forget the sin of laying hands on a priest. Excommunication is no small matter. What good is honor if your soul is damned? Capitana Maria shook her head firmly. God himself commands us to honor our fathers and mothers. No one, not even a friar, can take that away from us. If Ibarra came to my home, I'd welcome him with open arms. As their discussion continued, the rustics gathered in the town plaza were having their own conversation about the implications of the incident. One man, whose son had been planning to attend the school Ibarra was building, expressed his frustration. Now there won't be any school. My son won't be a doctor, just a carter like me. Who says there won't be a school? Asked a wide-cheeked man with a puzzled look. They've called Don Crisostomo a filibustero, the man replied gloomily. That's worse than any insult. It's enough to get a man hanged. All around, heads nodded in agreement as the townspeople pondered the future of San Diego, and whether they dared stand beside Crisostomo Ibarra in the face of such powerful enemies.